The restaurant inside the Grandview Hotel was the kind of place where everything seemed to sparkle. Golden lights reflected off crystal glasses, soft piano music filled the air, and the guests looked like they belonged to another world. Every table had a centerpiece of white roses, and every waiter moved quickly, trying not to make a single mistake. Among them was a young woman in a neatly pressed uniform. Her hair was tied back, her shoes were clean though a bit worn, and her eyes carried the calm patience of someone who had learned to survive hard days without complaint. She moved between tables with quiet grace, balancing trays filled with wine and silver dishes. Most people didn't even notice her. To them, she was just part of the background, like the candles or the soft jazz music. But she noticed everything. She noticed how people laughed loudly when they felt powerful, how some smiled only when others were watching, and how the kindest ones were usually the ones who didn't have to prove anything. She didn't judge them. She was just there to work. Her shift had started at noon and would end close to midnight. Her feet hurt, but she had learned not to think about that. Every plate she carried meant a few more dollars toward the rent, the bills, and her younger sister's school fees. She had no choice but to keep going. That night, the hotel was hosting a private dinner for a group of businessmen. The room had been reserved weeks in advance, and everyone on staff had been warned to be extra careful. The main guest was a billionaire known across the country, a man whose face often appeared in magazines beside luxury cars and expensive yachts. People said he could buy anything he wanted. Some said he even believed it. When he entered the restaurant, the energy in the room changed. His presence carried weight. His suit looked like it cost more than what the entire staff made in a month. He smiled easily, but there was something sharp behind that smile, the kind of confidence that could make others shrink without him saying a word. The waitress was assigned to his table. Her hands felt colder than usual as she adjusted the wine glasses. She didn't want to make a mistake, not tonight. The man and his friends talked loudly, their laughter echoing off the walls. They joked about their wealth, about deals, about other people who weren't in the room. When she approached to serve wine, one of the men cracked a joke about how serious she looked. "Relax," he said, laughing. "You'd think we were going to bite." She forced a small smile and continued pouring. But as she moved the bottle to the last glass, a drop of wine slipped down the side and landed near the billionaire's cufflink. It was only a drop, barely visible. But he looked down, frowned, and then lifted his head slowly. The table went quiet. "Well," he said, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "I guess even the staff here needs a little training." His friends laughed. The waitress froze. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the laughter around the table drowned out her voice. She set the bottle down gently, whispered a quick sorry, and turned away before her face showed what she was feeling. At the counter, she took a deep breath. Her chest felt tight, but she wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. The other waiter beside her whispered, "Don't take it to heart. He does that to everyone." She nodded. She had seen this kind of man before. People who thought making others feel small made them seem bigger. Still, the sting didn't fade quickly. When she returned to the dining area, the laughter at that table had already resumed. The billionaire was telling a story about one of his business rivals, making everyone roar with amusement. She noticed how his eyes scanned the room, how he seemed to enjoy the attention. But every now and then his gaze drifted back to her, almost like he was still amused by what had happened earlier. As the night went on, she kept doing her job silently, clearing plates, refilling glasses, and making sure everyone had what they wanted. Her movements were steady, graceful even. The music from the lounge piano played softly in the background, a gentle tune that reminded her of another life, one that felt like it belonged to someone else now. Years ago, before all of this, she had loved the piano. It wasn't just an instrument to her, it was her escape. She had learned to play in her old neighborhood church, where a retired musician had taught children for free on weekends. The first time she touched the keys, she had felt something come alive inside her. It was as if the music could speak for her when words failed. For a while, she had dreamed of becoming a pianist, maybe even a music teacher one day. But dreams were fragile when money was short and life was unkind. When her mother fell ill, she quit everything to take care of her and her little sister. After that, there was no going back. Now the sound of the hotel's piano was a faint reminder of the world she had left behind. She tried not to think about it, but sometimes, when she passed by that corner after closing time, She would touch the edge of the piano just once, before turning off the lights. The night grew longer and more guests began to leave. The laughter at the Billionaire's table grew louder. Their conversations slurred slightly as the wine bottles emptied. The waitress kept her distance unless she was called over. At one point, she overheard one of them say, "You know what would be funny? If the staff played for us. That piano's been sitting there all night." Another man laughed. "Maybe she can play," he said, pointing toward the waitress. "She looks like she could handle the keys." The billionaire looked at her for a moment, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "That's not a bad idea," he said. "Let's see if she's got any hidden talents." The waitress froze mid-step, unsure if she had heard correctly. He waved his hand. "Come on," he said in a voice that sounded friendly but wasn't. "Why don't you give us a little performance? Play something nice. Consider it a little fun for the night." She hesitated, her heart pounding. "Sir, I'm sorry," she said softly. "I don't play anymore," he laughed. "Anymore? So you do know how. Even better." His friends started clapping mockingly, chanting for her to play. Her face flushed with embarrassment. Every eye in the room seemed to turn toward her. The manager noticed the scene and started walking over, but the billionaire raised his hand. "It's fine," he said. "Just a bit of fun. She's free to say no if she wants." But his tone said otherwise. She looked at the piano. It stood quietly in the corner, polished and waiting. It had been years since her hands had touched real keys. She could almost feel them calling her. But her fear was stronger. "I really shouldn't," she whispered. He shrugged, pretending to be disappointed. "Shame. I thought you might surprise us." He leaned back in his chair and the laughter resumed around him. She turned away, her throat tight. But the sound of their laughter followed her like a shadow. She could have ignored it. She had ignored worse. But something about the way they were laughing, like she wasn't even human, lit a small spark inside her chest. She stopped walking. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear anymore. She turned around slowly and looked at the piano again. The music had stopped. Everyone was watching her now, curious. Without saying a word, she began to walk toward the instrument. The billionaire raised an eyebrow, surprised. His friends went quiet, waiting to see what would happen next. She reached the piano and pulled the stool out gently. For a long moment, she just sat there staring at the keys. Her reflection shone faintly in the black surface. She could hear her heart beating louder than the murmurs around her. No one expected her to actually play. Some probably thought she would just sit there awkwardly and stand up again. But when she lifted her hands, something inside her shifted. A quiet confidence that had been sleeping for years. The billionaire leaned back, smiling, ready to enjoy his prank. His phone was already in his hand. Camera open, she placed her fingers on the keys. The room fell into silence. Even the waiters stopped moving. The air was thick with expectation. And then she pressed the first note. The sound of that first note filled the room like a quiet whisper that demanded to be heard. It wasn't loud or showy, just one simple, clean tone that somehow made everyone stop breathing for a moment. Her fingers trembled slightly, but they didn't stop. The next few notes followed, slow at first, uncertain, as if her hands were remembering something from a long time ago. The crowd expected mistakes, maybe even laughter, but what they heard instead was something pure. A melody began to form, soft and deep, like it came from a place that words could never reach. The billionaire's smile slowly faded. He had expected a joke, something clumsy to make his friends laugh again. But now he sat there frozen, his phone still raised in his hand but no longer recording. His eyes followed her fingers as they moved faster, smoother, more confident. The waitress no longer looked afraid. Her posture changed as she played, her back straightening, her shoulders relaxing. It was as if the music was breathing life back into her. The notes rose and fell like waves, gentle, beautiful, full of emotion. The chatter in the restaurant faded away completely. Even the waiters stopped walking. The room, once filled with laughter and arrogance, now belonged entirely to her and the piano. Every note she played carried a memory. She remembered sitting at that old church piano years ago, her teacher guiding her hands, telling her to feel the music, not just play it. She remembered her mother humming while she practiced in their small apartment. She remembered her sister dancing to the rhythm. All those moments came back as she played, blending into the melody like pieces of her soul. She wasn't just performing for the people in that room. She was reclaiming a part of herself that she thought she had lost forever. The billionaire leaned forward, his elbows on the table, completely silent. His friends exchanged uneasy looks. The teasing smiles that had once curved their lips were gone. One of them lowered his head slightly, ashamed of having laughed earlier. The melody grew stronger. Her hands moved faster now, not out of pressure but out of freedom. The rhythm shifted from sadness to strength, as if the song itself was telling her story. From pain to courage, from humiliation to grace. When the last note finally faded, it left behind a silence more powerful than any applause. For several seconds no one moved. Then someone from another table began to clap softly. Another joined. Soon the whole room was clapping, some even standing. She sat there quietly, her eyes downcast, still breathing heavily from the rush of emotion. Her hands rested on her lap. The billionaire stood up slowly, still staring at her. The room's applause continued, but he didn't join in. His expression was unreadable. Shock, maybe admiration, maybe guilt. When she finally looked up, their eyes met for just a second. He opened his mouth slightly but said nothing. The manager hurried over, smiling nervously. "That was incredible," he whispered. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She smiled faintly. "A long time ago," she said softly. He wanted to say more, but she stood up, gave a small nod, and walked back toward the counter. Her hands were still shaking, but now they trembled from emotion, not fear. Behind her, the billionaire sat down again, lost in thought. His friends tried to lighten the mood with nervous laughter, but it didn't sound the same. Something about what had just happened changed the atmosphere completely. The night carried on, but no one seemed interested in more jokes or drinks. Conversations turned quieter. The billionaire didn't touch his glass again. Later, as the guests began to leave, he stayed seated for a while longer. He kept looking at the piano, as if trying to understand what he had just witnessed. When the waitress passed by to clear his table, he spoke for the first time since she played. "You're really good," he said quietly, his voice softer now. Stripped of its earlier arrogance, she paused, unsure what to say. "Thank you," she replied simply. He nodded but didn't look up. "You've played before?" "I used to," she said. Life got in the way. There was a moment of silence between them. For the first time, he didn't look at her like she was just staff. His tone was almost respectful. When she walked away, he sat there a while longer, his mind replaying the music in his head. He didn't understand why it bothered him so much, but something about that performance made him feel small. Not in the way he was used to making others feel, but in a way that made him question himself. The next morning, the video from one of the guests began spreading online. Someone had filmed her entire performance. The title read something like, "Waitress shocks billionaire with piano performance after being mocked." Within hours, the clip had thousands of views. People wrote comments like, "This gave me chills. She plays like she's telling a story. That man's face when she started, priceless." By the afternoon, the video had spread to news outlets and social media pages. People began asking who the mysterious waitress was. Reporters called the hotel trying to find her name, but she didn't know any of that yet. When she came into work that evening, she had no idea the world had already started talking about her. She just wanted to get through another shift. The hotel manager met her at the entrance, smiling more warmly than usual. "You're trending online," he said. She blinked. "What do you mean?" He showed her the video on his phone. Her heart raced as she watched herself playing, hearing the melody echo through the small speaker. She couldn't believe it. "Someone filmed that?" she asked quietly. "Everyone's talking about you," he said. "You should be proud." That was amazing. She didn't know what to say. Part of her felt happy, part of her scared. She had spent years trying to stay invisible, and now suddenly everyone wanted to see her. That night, the restaurant was busier than ever. Guests came not just for dinner, but to catch a glimpse of the piano waitress. Some even asked her to play again, but she politely declined. She didn't want to turn that moment into a show. It had meant too much to her. Later in the evening, the billionaire returned. His entrance was quieter this time. He didn't bring a crowd of friends, just his assistant. He requested a private table. When the waitress saw him, her heart skipped. She wasn't angry. She had already let that go. But she didn't expect to see him again so soon. He called her over, not to order, but to talk. His voice had changed. It was softer, more careful. "I came to apologize," he said. "I shouldn't have put you in that situation." It was wrong. She looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "It's all right," she said quietly. "It turned out okay." He shook his head. "No, you made it okay." "I didn't." For a moment neither spoke. The sound of the piano in the lounge filled the silence, a different pianist playing a slow jazz tune. "You really have something special," he said finally. "That performance, I can't get it out of my head." She smiled politely, unsure how to respond. "Thank you," she said again, then turned to leave. Before she could walk away, he added, "If you ever want help, lessons, connections, whatever you need, I can arrange it." She stopped, surprised by the offer. But then she shook her head. "I appreciate it, but I think I'll find my own way." There was no bitterness in her voice, just quiet confidence. He nodded slowly. "I respect that." After he left, she stood near the piano again, staring at it from a distance. It was strange. The same piano that had once felt like a painful reminder was now the thing that brought her hope again. For the rest of the night, she kept thinking about how life could change in a single moment. She didn't know what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something she hadn't felt in years, a possibility. And somewhere in the city, people she'd never met were still watching that video, sharing it, talking about her music, her story, her strength. The world had seen something real that night. A reminder that greatness can come from anywhere, even from behind a tray of dishes. As she closed the restaurant later that night, she passed by the piano once more. The room was empty, the lights dim. She sat down quietly, just for herself this time, and pressed one single note. It sounded like hope. By the next morning, her world had already changed, though she didn't know it yet. The sun had barely risen when her phone began to buzz nonstop on the nightstand. She was still half asleep when she picked it up, squinting at the screen. Dozens of messages from coworkers, old friends, even numbers she didn't recognize filled her inbox. Some said, "You're famous." Others sent her links to social media posts and videos. At first, she didn't understand. She opened one of the links, and there it was, the video from the restaurant. Her hands were trembling on screen, her face calm and focused, and the sound of the piano filled her tiny bedroom through the phone's small speaker. It already had over 1 million views. She sat there frozen, watching herself play, watching the faces of the guests around her. The shock, the silence, the emotion. It didn't feel real. It felt like watching someone else's life. Her sister rushed into the room holding a tablet. "You're all over the internet," she said with excitement. "People are calling you the piano waitress." Her first instinct was to panic. She had never wanted attention. She liked her quiet life, even if it was hard. But as she scrolled through the comments, something softened in her. People weren't mocking her, and they were touched. "This made me cry. Her music feels alive." That, Billionaire got humbled. Talent has no label or price. Didn't expect kindness from strangers, yet there it was. Thousands of messages full of warmth and admiration. Still, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. Fame was something she had never asked for. She was just doing her job. And playing that piano had been a moment of emotion, not performance. But now it seemed like the whole world wanted to turn it into a story. When she arrived at work that evening, the hotel felt different. The staff looked at her with pride, some smiling and whispering as she passed. The manager greeted her like a celebrity, showing her more news articles. "Reporters have been calling all day," he said. "They want interviews. Some guests came just to meet you." She smiled politely, though it made her nervous. "I'm just here to work," she said quietly. But that wasn't how the world saw her anymore. Guests recognized her instantly. Some asked for selfies. Others asked if she would play again. She refused gently each time, explaining she wasn't a performer. Yet inside, part of her missed the feeling of those keys beneath her fingers. It wasn't fame she wanted. It was that moment of connection the music had given her. As the week went on, her life kept shifting in ways she couldn't control. Invitations started coming from talk shows, music schools, and even charities. One email caught her attention. It was from a music producer who said he wanted to meet her in person. She didn't know if it was real, but curiosity pushed her to reply. He sounded genuine, saying he had seen something rare in her performance, not just skill, but emotion that came from a real place. Still, she didn't say yes right away. She needed time to think. Meanwhile, the billionaire's life was taking a very different turn. The same video that made her beloved had made him the subject of public shame. People criticized him online, calling him arrogant and cruel. His company's name began appearing in negative headlines. His publicist tried to repair his image, but the internet had already chosen its side. He stayed quiet for days, avoiding interviews and appearances. The scene from that night played over and over in his head. Every time he remembered how he had laughed at her, a heavy guilt settled in his chest. He wasn't used to feeling guilty. For years he'd lived in a world where power meant being untouchable, but that night had broken something inside his confidence. He realized for the first time that money couldn't buy respect. Not real respect. One morning he told his driver to take him back to the Grandview Hotel. The staff seemed surprised to see him again. The manager greeted him carefully, unsure of what to expect. "I'd like to speak with her," he said quietly. The manager hesitated. "She's working right now, sir." "I'll wait," he said, taking a seat at a small corner table. When she finally came out from the back, she saw him sitting there. No friends, no loud laughter, no cameras. Just him alone. She approached cautiously. "Good evening, sir." He stood up. "Please," he said, his tone humble. "Can we talk?" She nodded slightly. They sat across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. "I owe you an apology," he began. "Not the kind people make to look good. A real one. What I did was wrong. I embarrassed you for my own amusement, and you didn't deserve that." She looked down at the table. "You already said sorry once," she reminded him softly. "I know," he said, "but I didn't understand then. I thought it was enough to just say the words. But the truth is, I can't stop thinking about what happened. You didn't just play that night, you taught me something." Her expression softened. "About what?" He exhaled. "About humility. About respect. I thought power meant control, but it means nothing without kindness. I saw that in you." There was silence again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. He looked at her directly. "If there's anything I can do to help you, to make things right, I'll do it. No conditions. Just tell me." She smiled faintly. "You already helped me without knowing it." He frowned slightly. "How?" "If you hadn't made me play, I might never have remembered what I love," she said simply. "I stopped dreaming a long time ago, but that night I felt alive again." Her words struck him deeply. He nodded slowly, unsure what else to say. A few minutes later, she was called away to help with another table. Before leaving, she turned and said, "I forgive you." He didn't respond right away. His throat tightened. When she walked away, he stayed seated, staring at the empty piano in the corner. That night, he made a quiet promise to himself and to change, to become someone better than the man he had been. Meanwhile, her story continued to spread. One morning, the same producer who had emailed her showed up at the hotel. He introduced himself politely and asked if she would consider auditioning for his label. "I'm not sure I'm ready for something like that," she said nervously. He smiled kindly. "No one's ever really ready," he said. "But I think the world needs to hear you again." After a long pause, she nodded. The following week, she found herself standing inside a recording studio for the first time in her life. The grand piano gleamed under the lights, and her reflection stared back from its polished surface. The producer gave her space, letting her breathe, letting her remember. When she sat down and touched the keys, the room seemed to disappear. The same melody she played that night returned to her fingers, but this time she wasn't trembling. She was confident, strong, free. When she finished, the producer looked amazed. "You've got something people can't fake," he said quietly. "You feel what you play, and that's what makes it special." He offered her a recording deal on the spot. She couldn't believe it. The dream she had buried years ago was suddenly alive again, standing right in front of her. She wanted to cry, but instead she smiled. A soft, grateful smile. That night, when she got home, her sister hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she whispered. "No," she said gently. "We did it. You believed in me even when I didn't." They sat together for hours, talking about what the future might look like. Concerts, recordings, maybe even teaching children music one day. In the quiet of that moment, she realized something important. Her story wasn't just about a billionaire or a viral video. It was about resilience and about how a single moment of courage could change everything. Across town, the billionaire watched her new interview on television. She spoke humbly, thanking the people who had supported her, never once mentioning his name. That silence humbled him more than any words could. He turned off the TV, sat in silence for a while, and smiled faintly. For the first time in years, he felt at peace with himself, not because he was powerful, but because he had finally learned what it meant to be human. And somewhere in that balance of regret and redemption, 2 lives had changed, both shaped by one unexpected melody that had started as a prank and ended as a miracle. Weeks passed, but life didn't go back to the way it used to be. Everything had changed. The once quiet waitress was now known everywhere as the Piano Miracle. Her story appeared in newspapers, online blogs, and even TV programs. People loved her humility, her talent, and the way she carried herself through everything with grace. She never imagined that something born from humiliation could turn into hope, not just for her, but for so many who saw themselves in her story. Still, she tried to stay grounded. Every morning she took the bus to the hotel, wore the same uniform, and worked the same hours. She didn't want fame to change who she was, but deep inside she knew life was slowly leading her somewhere new. One afternoon, the hotel manager called her into his office. He smiled as she entered. "You've been offered a guest spot on a talk show," he said, showing her an email on his computer. "They want you to play live and share your story." She blinked in surprise. "Me? On television?" He nodded. "You're an inspiration to a lot of people. I think you should do it." She hesitated. The idea of being in front of cameras again made her nervous. But after thinking about it that night, she realized it wasn't about fame. It was about showing people that sometimes beautiful things can grow from painful moments, so she said yes. The studio lights were bright when she arrived. The audience clapped as she walked on stage. The host greeted her kindly, asking gentle questions about her life, her family, and how she felt during that night at the hotel. She spoke honestly, her voice calm and humble. "I didn't plan to play," she said. "It just happened. I think sometimes life pushes us to remember who we are." Then the host asked her to play. A piano waited on stage, shining under the lights. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play the same song that had changed her life. The melody was soft at first, then stronger, fuller. The crowd grew silent, listening. Some wiped tears from their eyes. When the final note faded, the applause was thunderous. By the next morning, her performance was everywhere again. But this time, something new happened. A well-known music foundation reached out, offering to sponsor her education in music. They wanted her to study properly, to train and grow her gift. It felt unreal. For years, she had given up on that dream, believing she'd missed her chance. Now the door was opening again. Her sister was overjoyed. "You have to do it," she said. "This is what you always wanted." She smiled, holding the letter tightly in her hands. "I know," she whispered. "But it's scary," her sister laughed. "You've faced scarier things than this." So, with hope and fear mixed together, she accepted the offer. The next few months were filled with lessons, rehearsals, and long hours in practice rooms. She studied music theory, composition, and performance under skilled teachers. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, exhaustion, and frustration. But every time she touched the keys, she remembered why she started. The sound of the piano still felt like home. Meanwhile, the billionaire's life was changing quietly in the background. He had pulled away from public events and social circles. His business continued, but he no longer seemed interested in showing off his wealth. He began funding scholarships for underprivileged students, quietly, without attaching his name. It was his way of giving back, though he never told anyone why. Sometimes he watched her new interviews online. She never mentioned him, never tried to humiliate him in return. Her silence spoke volumes. It was the kind of forgiveness that humbled him even more. He kept thinking about something she had said that night. "You already helped me without knowing it." Those words stayed with him, like a small light in the back of his mind, guiding him to be better. Months later, she was invited to perform at a charity concert in the city. It would be her first time performing on a big stage with a full audience. The event was meant to raise funds for young musicians from low-income families, something that touched her deeply. The night of the concert, she stood backstage, wearing a simple gown. Her hands were cold, her stomach tight with nerves. She looked at the piano waiting under the spotlight and thought about all the steps that had brought her here, from the restaurant, to that prank, to this moment. When her name was announced, the crowd erupted in applause. She walked out slowly, bowing her head slightly, then took her seat at the piano. The room quieted. She closed her eyes and began to play. This time her song was different. It was still emotional, but it carried warmth instead of sadness. It spoke of growth, forgiveness, and hope. Every note felt like a new beginning. The audience listened in awe, some holding their breath, as if afraid to miss a single sound. When the last note faded, she looked up and saw people standing, applauding, smiling, crying. In the front row sat someone she didn't expect, the billionaire. He had come quietly without anyone announcing his presence. He stood with the rest of the audience, clapping with a look on his face that was hard to describe. Part pride, part regret, and part admiration. After the concert ended, she was surrounded by people congratulating her, shaking her hand, asking for photos. But through the crowd, she saw him waiting near the side exit, hands in his pockets as if unsure whether to approach. When she finally walked toward him, he smiled softly. "You were incredible," he said. "Thank you," she replied. "I didn't want to bother you," he said. "I just wanted to see you play again." She studied him for a moment. He looked different, calmer, humbler. His eyes no longer carried the cold pride they once did. "I heard you've been doing a lot of good work," she said, "helping students." He looked a little embarrassed. "Trying to," he said quietly. "It's the least I can do," she nodded. "That's a good thing. Sometimes it takes one wrong moment to lead us to the right path." He smiled faintly. "You're right. That night was the worst and best thing that's ever happened to me." They stood there in silence for a while, the noise of the crowd fading behind them. Then she said, "I'm glad we both found something good out of it." He extended his hand. "You deserve everything coming your way." She shook it gently. "Thank you," she said. "And thank you for coming tonight." He nodded, then stepped back. "Goodbye," he said softly. "Goodbye," she replied. As he walked away, she watched him disappear into the crowd. A strange peace filled her chest, not triumph, not revenge, but understanding. Life had come full circle. That night, when she returned home, she sat at her small kitchen table with her sister. They celebrated with tea and laughter, talking about the future. Her sister told her she was proud, and for the first time in years, she truly felt proud of herself, too. She realized success wasn't just about fame or money. It was about doing what you love, forgiving what hurt you, and staying true to your heart no matter where life takes you. As days turned into weeks, she kept performing, teaching, and giving back. She started a small foundation to help children learn music, naming it after the street where she had grown up. Whenever she visited the classroom, she'd sit beside the kids, showing them how to place their fingers on the keys, reminding them to listen not just with their ears, but with their hearts. Sometimes after class, she'd stay behind and play alone, lost in the sound. The room would be empty, sunlight spilling through the windows, the music echoing softly. It was in those quiet moments that she felt the most grateful, not for the fame, but for the journey that brought her here. She had once been a waitress in a hotel, invisible to everyone. Now she was a musician, not because of luck or wealth, but because she had never let her spirit break. And far away, in his office overlooking the city, the billionaire watched one of her new performances online. The camera caught her smiling as she played, surrounded by children learning from her. He leaned back in his chair, a quiet smile crossing his face. He knew he would never erase his past mistakes, but seeing her happy gave him something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Two very different lives had crossed paths in the unlikeliest of ways, and from that meeting both had learned the same truth. Sometimes, the most beautiful changes come from the most painful beginnings. Time moved gently like a quiet river. The young woman's life had changed in ways she could never have imagined. What began as a painful prank had now turned into a story that inspired millions. She was no longer just a girl who worked long hours behind a counter. She was a symbol of hope, strength, and quiet grace. Her foundation, which helped poor children learn music, was growing faster than she expected. Every week, new families came with shy, wide-eyed kids who had never touched a piano before. Some came barefoot, others with worn clothes, but all of them carried the same spark: a dream waiting to be noticed. She loved spending time with them. She would sit beside them on the old wooden benches, guiding their small fingers over the keys. "Don't rush," she would say softly. "Listen to your heart. The piano is not just about sound, it's about feeling." She never spoke about her past during lessons. The children didn't need to know how her story began. What mattered was what they could become. One day while teaching, she noticed a little boy sitting quietly in the corner, watching but not joining in. His clothes were torn and he kept his hands hidden in his lap. After class, she walked over to him. "Why don't you play something?" she asked gently. He looked down. "I don't know how." "That's okay," she smiled. "Nobody knows how at first." "Come try," he shook his head. "I don't have money to join." She crouched beside him. "You don't need money here," she said. "You just need heart." The boy hesitated, then slowly walked over to the piano. His fingers trembled as he touched the keys. The first sound was uneven, clumsy, but she smiled anyway. "See? That's the start," she said softly. "Every song begins with one note." That small moment reminded her of her own beginning. One note. One chance, one unexpected moment that changed everything. Meanwhile, her own music career had started to take off in ways she hadn't planned. She was invited to play at festivals, music halls, and even universities. Her story traveled ahead of her. The girl who went from waitress to world-class pianist. But she tried to stay grounded, always returning home after big events to teach her students. During one of her tours, she was asked to perform in another country for a global charity event. The stage was huge, with lights brighter than she had ever seen. The crowd was massive, thousands of faces waiting for her to play. She felt nervous at first, but when she sat down at the piano, the noise faded away. It was just her and the music. Her fingers danced across the keys, telling her story without words. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet, clapping until their hands turned red. Backstage, several well-known musicians came to meet her. One of them said, "You play with emotion, not just skill." "That's rare," she smiled shyly. "Thank you," she said. "Music saved me once. I think I just want to give it back." Those words stayed with everyone who met her. A few days later, she returned home to her quiet apartment. Her sister was waiting at the door with a huge smile. "You're all over the news again," she laughed, showing her the TV. "They called you the heart of the piano." She laughed softly. "That sounds strange." "It sounds perfect," her sister replied. As her fame grew, so did her responsibilities. She was invited to speak at schools and youth programs, sharing her story. She talked about hard work, humility, and forgiveness. But she never spoke about the billionaire by name. She had long forgiven him and believed the world didn't need to know the details. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done with them yet. One afternoon, she received a letter. It was written in elegant handwriting, short and simple. "I'm organizing a charity gala to fund music education for underprivileged youth. It would mean a lot if you performed. A friend." There was no signature, but she knew who it was. For a long time, she sat staring at the letter. She wasn't angry. She wasn't afraid. But something in her heart hesitated. She had moved on, but going back, performing in front of him again, felt strange. Her sister found her sitting quietly and asked, "Are you going to go?" She nodded slowly. "Yes," she said, "because this isn't about the past. It's about what we both learned from it." The gala was held in a grand ballroom, the same hotel where everything had started. Walking through those glass doors again made her heart tighten. The scent, the lighting, the sound of laughter, it all brought memories rushing back. But this time she walked in not as a waitress, but as the honored guest. People turned to look at her with admiration, not dismissal. She wore a simple but elegant dress, her hair tied back neatly. When she entered the main hall, she saw him across the room. The billionaire stood near the stage, talking to guests. He looked different, older, gentler, and less like the man who once laughed at her. When he saw her, his expression softened. He walked over slowly and smiled. "Thank you for coming," he said. She nodded. "I'm glad to be here. It's a beautiful cause." He looked around the room, then back at her. "You inspired it," he admitted. "I wanted to do something good. Something real." She smiled. "That's good to hear. You're helping a lot of children." He hesitated, then said quietly, "You changed me, you know. I don't think I ever said thank you." She looked at him for a moment, then said, You don't need to. We both found our way. The evening moved smoothly. Guests donated large sums, musicians performed, and the atmosphere was filled with warmth and generosity. When it was her turn to play, the room grew silent. She sat at the same piano she had once played as a joke. Her hands hovered over the keys. For a second, the memory of that night flickered in her mind. The laughter, the shame, the trembling. Then she closed her eyes and began to play. Her music flowed like water, gentle and deep. It spoke of forgiveness, resilience, and hope. Every note carried emotion, telling a story that words never could. The crowd listened in awe. Even the billionaire couldn't hold back tears. When she finished, the audience stood and clapped for a long time. She bowed quietly, then looked at him. He nodded slowly, eyes shining with gratitude. After the event, he approached her again. "You've turned pain into something beautiful," he said softly. "I'll never forget that," she smiled. "Neither will I, but pain only wins if we let it stop us." He nodded, understanding. For the first time, there was no wall between them. Only respect. Later that night, when she returned home, she stood by her window and looked at the city lights. Everything felt peaceful. She knew now that every difficult chapter in her life had led her here, to this balance, this understanding. Her story was no longer about revenge or even success. It was about transformation. She had changed not only her life but also someone else's. In the weeks that followed, donations to her foundation poured in. The billionaire continued supporting the cause quietly, never asking for recognition. Together, though apart, they were shaping a future for young musicians who might never have had a chance otherwise. At one of her foundation's new centers, she stood watching the children play. Their laughter filled the room as tiny fingers stumbled over piano keys. She smiled, remembering her own shaky first notes. A little girl looked up at her and asked, "Do you think I can play like you one day?" She knelt down beside her and said, "Of course you can. You just need to keep believing even when no one else does." The girl grinned. "I'll practice every day." "Good," she said softly, "because one day you'll play your own story." As she walked out into the sunlight that afternoon, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: complete peace. Her journey had come full circle. She no longer carried the weight of that old pain. Instead, she carried purpose. Sometimes, the things that break us are the same things that build us into who we're meant to be. And though the world would remember her for her talent, she knew her greatest song wasn't the one she played on stage. It was the quiet music she helped others find within themselves. The years passed quietly, like pages turning in a gentle book. The young woman's name had become known far and wide, not for scandal or wealth, but for kindness and inspiration. What started as a prank had turned into a legacy that reached far beyond music. Her foundation had grown into something beautiful. Centers were now open in several cities, each filled with children learning not just piano, but also how to dream. She often traveled between them, greeting teachers and students, making sure everything stayed true to its purpose, helping those who had no voice find one through music. Despite her fame, she never lost her warmth. She still took the bus sometimes, still smiled at strangers, still found joy in small things: a child's laughter, a cup of tea, the sound of rain on the window. Success hadn't changed her heart. One morning, as she sat at her piano, a letter arrived. The handwriting was neat and familiar. She opened it slowly. "I wanted to thank you once again for what you started. The foundation we built has reached thousands of children now. You turned something small into something I could never have imagined. I've been thinking about that night, not with regret anymore, but with gratitude. Because it led both of us to better versions of ourselves. I'm not sure if we'll ever cross paths again, but if we don't, know that I'll always admire what you did. An old friend." She folded the letter carefully and smiled. It had been years since she last saw the billionaire. Their lives had gone in different directions, but the connection remained, a quiet thread of respect and forgiveness that time couldn't break. That evening, she sat at the piano, running her fingers gently over the keys. She began to play a melody that came from somewhere deep inside her. It was soft and full of life, like a farewell, but also a thank you. The next morning, she visited one of the new music centers. The building buzzed with energy. Children laughed, music floated through the hallways, and the smell of old instruments filled the air. As she walked inside, a young teacher hurried over. "We've been waiting for you," he said excitedly. The kids prepared something special. She followed him into a large room. Dozens of children sat at their instruments, pianos, violins, and flutes. When they saw her, they grinned. One of them stood up and said, "We wrote this song for you. It's called The First Note." Her eyes softened. "That's a beautiful title," she said quietly. When they began to play, the room filled with sound. It wasn't perfect. Some notes were off, some rhythms uneven. But it was pure, full of heart. She listened with tears in her eyes, realizing how much love had grown from one painful moment years ago. When they finished, she clapped with the biggest smile. "That was beautiful," she said. "You've all made me so proud." After class, a little boy came up to her. "Is it true?" he asked shyly, "that someone once made fun of you for playing?" She paused, then nodded. "Yes," she said softly. "A long time ago." "Did it hurt?" he asked. She smiled gently. "It did. But sometimes hurt can teach you strength. And when you forgive, you grow even stronger." The boy thought for a moment, then said, "I want to be like you." She laughed quietly. "No," she said, kneeling down. "Be like you. That's even better." Later that week, she was invited to perform at a grand concert celebrating the 10th anniversary of her foundation. It would be her biggest performance yet, broadcast across the country. She hesitated at first. She never liked big crowds. But she agreed, not for fame, but for the children who believed in her. The night of the concert arrived. The theater was full. Musicians, teachers, students, and donors all gathered under the glittering lights. As she stepped onto the stage, the audience erupted into applause. She looked around and smiled. She had come such a long way, from serving tables to standing on the most elegant stages. Yet, she still felt like the same girl who once played. Alone in a quiet room, chasing a sound only she could hear, she sat down at the piano. The lights dimmed. For a moment, she just breathed, the same way she had done so many times before. Then she began to play. The music started softly, almost like a whisper. It spoke of struggle, loss, forgiveness, and love. Each note carried a piece of her journey. The melody rose and fell like waves, growing stronger with every chord. The audience leaned forward, completely silent. Some closed their eyes. Others held their breath. Even the air seemed to listen. Halfway through the song, she thought of all the faces that had shaped her story. Her sister, the children, and even the man who once humiliated her. Strangely, instead of anger, she felt gratitude. If not for that one night, none of this would have existed. When the final note faded, she looked up. The crowd was on its feet. The applause thundered through the hall. Tears filled her eyes, but she smiled through them. She stood, bowed, and whispered, "Thank you." Backstage, reporters waited, but she avoided the interviews. Instead, she slipped out quietly and walked alone under the night sky. The city lights glowed and the cool breeze brushed her face. She found a small bench near the fountain outside the theater and sat there for a while, listening to the sound of water. Everything felt still, peaceful. After a few minutes, a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You haven't changed much." She turned, surprised. The billionaire stood there, dressed simply, without the usual air of power or wealth. His smile was quiet, almost shy. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said softly. "I almost didn't come," he admitted. "But I wanted to hear you play again." She smiled faintly. "It's been a long time." "It has," he said, "but you haven't lost your gift." She looked at him for a moment. "And you haven't lost your kindness," she said. "It's good to see you." They sat in silence for a while, the sound of the fountain filling the space between them. He finally spoke. I've thought a lot about that night over the years. I used to wish I could go back and change it, but now I think it was meant to happen. It changed both of us. She nodded. Yes. Sometimes life breaks us just enough to let the light in. He smiled softly. You really did forgive me, didn't you? I did, she said. Because if I hadn't, I wouldn't be who I am now. He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. You made the world better. I just wanted to say, thank you, for everything. She smiled, looking up at the night sky. You helped too. You might not have meant to, but you did. He chuckled quietly. Maybe. I guess even mistakes can build something good. They both laughed softly, the kind of laughter that comes when all the pain has long passed. After a while, he stood up. I should go, he said. But I hope you keep playing. The world needs to hear your music. I will, she said, and I hope you keep helping others. He nodded, then turned and walked away into the city lights. She watched him until he disappeared, then looked back at the fountain, her reflection shimmering in the water. In that moment, she felt everything: gratitude, peace, and the quiet joy of knowing her story had come full circle. She went home that night and sat at her piano once more. Her sister was asleep, the apartment quiet. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play one last song before bed, a song she'd never written down, never performed, but kept only for herself. It was soft, simple, and full of light. It wasn't about sadness or pain anymore. It was about freedom, the freedom that comes when you let go of the past and choose to love life as it is. The notes floated through the small room, gentle and warm. Outside, the moon shone through the window, lighting her face as she played. And as the final note faded into the night, she smiled. Not because of where she ended up, but because of where she began. Because sometimes, the smallest moment, even one filled with hurt, can lead you to the greatest song of your life. And hers had only just begun.